Hello, my friends. What is up? We're back. It's 2022. I took a little bit of a break to de-stress, got some new job stuff going on, and we're back. It's gonna be a great new year. Put myself to the challenge of reading a book a week, and so far I've been able to meet that and surpass it, so things are looking pretty good right now. Today, I'd like to talk to you about a book called Minimum Wage Magic by Rachel Aaron. This is the first book in a series called the DFZ series. It's in the same world as another series that Rachel Aaron has written called the Heartstriker series. I'm gonna give my spoiler-free talk, so that way if you haven't read the book and it sounds interesting, you can go ahead and do that, and then I'll give my warnings. You can pause the video, go read the book, and then come back in a few days when you've read it, and you can hear all my spoiler thoughts on it as well. Minimum Wage Magic is an urban fantasy thriller story set in a cyberpunk-ish future Detroit. Magic has returned to the world, and with that, so have a whole bunch of gods that the people have kind of forgotten about. The Lady of the Lakes, Algonquin, not super hype about Detroit polluting the waters and everything, so she just went in, raised the city, flattened it out, no more Motor City, brought it back as her own new city, and that's called the Detroit Free Zone. It seems to be like it's separate from America, free of like a lot of the regulations and the laws, and this is kind of a place where people come to do all the things you can't normally do. Get crazy cool body augments that are normally illegal, do some cool rare magical monster trading, drugs. As time went on, it became so autonomous, the spirit of the city kind of grew up and became its own god and kicked Algonquin right back to the lakes, and now the spirit of the DFZ is the god that overlooks the whole city and continues with this idea of no regulation, no laws. We follow Opal, who is a cleaner for the city. She cleans out apartments and houses that are past due on rent. She's making her cash kind of Storage Wars style. Anything that she finds in one of the places that she's cleaning, she can take and then she can then go ahead and sell. So that's where a lot of her income's coming from. But unfortunately, the past few months, she's been down on her luck. She's not been making a lot of good finds in these apartments. And that's going to continue into her newest job at the start of this story, where while she's busting into this new apartment to clean out, she finds a dead body. And with that dead body, she finds the mysterious clues that are gonna kickstart the rest of this story. This book was really fun. The world that Rachel Aaron has crafted feels extremely real in the sense that there's a lot of internal consistency and breadth of exploration that we get to see of this city as we go throughout the story, while having all those wondrous elements put together in a way that really sets it apart from a lot of the urban fantasy that I've read in the past. The magic is upfront and in your face, and it meshes really well with the cyberpunk aspects. This world has a little bit of everything: gods of death, dragon mob style families, magical art history PhD programs, an ever-changing skyline that moves and shapes to the whims of the spirit of the DFZ, seedy cyberpunk merchant rows. It's all here. And when you list it all out like that, it sounds like it's really going to clash with each other. There's a lot of stuff going on, and this book is pretty short, so it doesn't feel like you have a lot of time to explore it. But Rachel Aaron is able to slowly introduce this to you. It starts pretty small scope in this status quo with an introduction to the magic, a little bit of the tech, and how those two things clash with each other. But then as the mystery, as the thriller kind of ramps up and Opal's needing to explore more parts of the city, Rachel Aaron's able to expand the scope of what we're seeing, what we're learning about this world. My biggest issue with some of the points of world building in this story is oftentimes we get a reference to something that is in our real world right now, and this story is kind of set 80 years in the future. A lot has happened in that time gap, but when you start getting references to things like Pocahontas or Jehovah's Witnesses, we do get a few cool references to things that have happened. Like, I think there's been 40 Indiana Joneses that have taken place, and that's like a fun small tidbit. A lot of religions that were revived or have come to be in this world after the return of magic, those things do get mentioned as well. But I just feel like the points where we drop the ball with old dated references in the perspective of Opal don't really do anything for the story. They don't really do anything for the world building other than being easy connection points for a reader to immediately understand what they're referencing, instead of taking a little bit more time to unpack what they're talking about, so that way you can better get a grasp of this world. Because like with the world of cyberpunk and dragons, are people still talking about Pocahontas? I don't know. It feels a bit out of place. And it certainly took me out of the reading when things like this popped up. Thankfully, it's only a handful of times. It just is unfortunate that these are missed opportunities in this story. The magic in this book is pretty soft. Opal hints at there being a proper way to perform the magic. There's like a lot of math, a lot of runes, a lot of theory behind it. But with the rest of the world building being so vast in what we have to take as a new normal, throwing on top of that a hard magic system feels like it would have been a mistake. You're already using up so much of the brain power of the reader to put together this city that we're exploring. And so I think Rachel Aaron made a good decision here of making Opal be more of a smash and grab mage. She just kind of puts the magic in her hands and then makes it does what she wants to do. She's not one for knowing the ins and outs of uses magic, just how to summon it up and just kind of smash things as she needs. Of course, there are some specific spells that she knows how to perform that she would need to know how to perform as a mage in this city, going against other mages that could potentially want to do her harm. But glazing over those really mechanical aspects of the magic because the character doesn't want to even look into them, it creates this interesting soft approach that works really well here, especially because we're seeing that magic isn't really a major solution for any of the problems that she's encountering. If anything, it causes more problems than it cures. And when you want to do soft magic, that's a good way to keep it interesting for the reader, not knowing how it works, but it's gunking stuff up, and that feels a lot better than not knowing how it works and it's solving a lot of the issues, because you'll lose a lot of stakes if you have a soft magic system that solves a lot of problems. Then as a reader, you're not sure if every single problem can just be solved by this soft magic system and you just haven't been told it yet. So having it be soft and causing issues is way more interesting from that perspective. And there's also no lack of dissonance there. Opal's not good at the magic. We don't understand the magic. The magic is soft. There's a good middle ground here that Rachel Aaron is kind of skirting, where in theory, this is a hard magic system. Just anyone that we're interacting with and reading about, they have no idea how to do it. So they're treating it as a soft magic system. This also allows from a craft perspective to make Opal way more vulnerable to the goings-ons of the city, to other people that know how to use this magic. They kind of have a leg up on her where she's just kind of throwing magic into the air and they're crafting spells and making runes. And that fits the really critical tone of this story of her being on the run from these sinister forces. And so it ups the stakes by not really knowing how this magic works. And so that's really well done. Opal herself is pretty great from a character perspective. The mysteries of what drives her as a character kind of get slowly revealed as we go through this story. And while it's a pretty short story, by the end of it, we definitely have a solid understanding of what makes Opal do the things that she does. And I think that that's something that's certainly hard to do in such a short word count for a lot of authors, while you're also focusing on this massive unpacking of essentially a completely new fantasy world. Well, I can certainly see her starting off for a reader as kind of being unlikable or pretty jarring in some ways. She's got some good redeeming aspects right off the bat. She's pretty funny. She kind of keeps it lighthearted, even though she is going through some serious things. And she has some incredible drive for accomplishing what she wants to do and for why she is the way she is. As you discover more about her, those things make more sense. And I feel like she becomes way more of a fleshed out, well done character that you get to enjoy by the end of the story and you get to look forward to in the coming books that she's going to be the main character of. I really enjoyed her. I really enjoyed this supporting cast that surrounds her. While we don't get as much insight into a lot of those characters, they feel a bit more tropey in they need to be here in this cyberpunk world. Her main supporting partner that she ends up teaming up with does get some good character development through this story as well. So I'm pretty thankful that the characters that we're seeing the most screen time for, they are also getting a lot of good characterization. And a lot of the other characters that hit those tropes, they don't need to be much more than that. And they do serve a good purpose in this story. Her partner, we get to see way more of why they're willing to help out Opal to begin with, when they seem like they would be way more of an antagonist figure based on how we're introduced to them. It still fits an expected trope in this kind of story form, but I ended up really liking that particular character a lot. So there's not a lot to complain about when you follow a trope, but you also make the character enjoyable. I think when you get an issue of a character feeling too much like a trope is when you either just don't care about them at all, or when you end up disliking them because of the trope aspect. So when you're able to flesh out a character, give them some depth, but ultimately they're still introduced to you as a trope, it works. And tropes work for a reason. They exist for a reason. And so when they're done well, they're done well. And I'm not going to complain about that. I really like the theme in this story of what forces will push you to do the things that you wouldn't normally do. What will force you to draw the line of where your morals stand and where you're willing to push that moral line a little bit just because you need to for these outside or external forces that are introduced to you. I think those themes speak to building out characters really well. I think they explore really interesting areas of character development of how much is this character willing to do that they know is bad, but they just need to do it because these other things are going to be worse. And it also pushes the plot forward in really interesting ways and kind of confronts Opal and creates these obstacles that she has to overcome while not completely tossing away her own moral systems. These themes really feed into just how strong this book feels by the end of it. And that's awesome. For such a short story, a lot gets established, a lot gets built up. And for the most part, it all feels logical and consistent with what we're expecting as we're reading this story. It makes sense. And I think that things making sense is an extremely critical aspect of urban fantasy stories in particular. As a reader, I feel like urban fantasy is meant to rely heavily on pre-established things. Urban fantasy is a meshing of a familiar yet alien world, making the familiar unfamiliar, but have it still make sense, have it all still have logical consistency. And this book is really able to pull off that sense of mystery and intrigue really well. I loved each time we got to see a new thing in the city, you get this wave of, that's a thing? But then almost immediately it falls into place and it just fits in the city and it works and it pushes plot forward or it pushes character forward. And it really just builds out the mural that is one of these urban fantasy cities. Even if that urban fantasy is in the future and it's more of a cyberpunk world, it still feels like it fits an urban fantasy theme. Overall, I really like this book. I think the world was built up in an interesting way and it was set up with way more mysteries and exploration to be had in future books. The characters were really enjoyable and their arcs I'm really hopeful for moving forward with the rest of the series. There's a heavy hand of comedy in a rather downtrodden and dark world, and that dichotomy is really appreciated. And my understanding is that's one of Rachel Aaron's really big strengths, so I'm looking forward to even more of that to take place in the world as we keep going. And you know, if you like urban fantasy, you like cyberpunk, I would definitely suggest you check this book out. It's pretty short. It's like 85,000 words, and that's like around the length of 1984. I'll give it 2 out of 3 Michelin stars. Get it? Because like Detroit, cars. Let's talk about my spoiler thoughts. Most of my issues with this story exist with the ending. I feel like this book is set up at the beginning like it's supposed to be a full-on mystery of, oh, what is this spell that the dead tenant has? What is it actually going to do? And we get that answer pretty early on. It's going to make cockatrice eggs. How many? I don't know. Why are they being made? I don't know. But the way we're delivered that answer from one of Opal's friends at the university, it leaves me feeling like that's not the whole answer. It leaves me feeling like there's more to discover there. And then we get to the end, we're approaching the great reveal of what's going on, and you feel that building of like, this is the mysterious reveal of what this spell really was supposed to be doing and why it was doing that. And it's just a lot of cockatrice eggs, like a lot. When early on, you know, Opal's thinking, oh, maybe it's gonna make like 10 and it makes like 50 or 100 of them. That is a mix up, I guess, of what the character was expecting, but that's kind of what I was expecting the whole entire time. So while it felt like it was structured like a mystery, it didn't end up actually being a mystery, and so that was kind of a weird cognitive dissonance that I felt while reading this story. It felt weird. Perhaps it was me hoping for something more. Perhaps it was just the way it was structured. I can't really say. However, I do really like this torn moral struggle fitting back with the themes that Nick and Opal face when they have to decide what to do with these eggs. The struggle of giving them up and making the cash that they need to be able to pay off their debts or to be good people. But this sets up like a final line in the sand of, no, at their core, they are good. Everyone has that moral line. And it was a good way to bring that idea to life as a core punch of the story, as like the final thing that they have to decide on. Because they do throughout the story go back and forth playing with this idea of, are these things that you're willing to do? Are they really something that you're okay with? And so for them to have to finally throw away what they need to do, what is externally pushing on them for what their internal moral system is, I think it was really well executed. The other part of the end that I felt was maybe a bit too much of a Deus Ex Machina for me to really fully enjoy was when Opal gets tossed off the floating platforms into the pure soul of the DFZ, she gets saved, and that's fine. But then she has a ghost conversation with the dead mage whose notes she's been tracking. And I get that we've been introduced to this god of the forgotten dead who has already interacted with Opal, and she's made a promise to him. This interaction still feels out of place to me. It's literally just the full-on spirit of the guy talking to her, and he's like, I've been following you. I know you're the only person who can do this. He just kind of hands her the last bits of necessary drive to finish this plot out, kind of heavy-handed forces her to do the right thing here. I think we could have kept this core structure, but maybe reworked the scenes a little bit. If she had met the God of the Forgotten Dead themselves, who she has already interacted with, this may have been a bit better of the, you still owe me that debt that you promised. I think that continues the themes of Opal owing things to people and being held to those no matter what, even when you're thrown into a swirling vortex black hole. And it keeps this moral choice of selling or saving the cockatrice eggs as her own autonomous decision and less being driven by this external force. I don't know. I think that structure change might have given this a bit more of a fulfilling ending. We didn't really establish before this that ghosts were things or that they were interactable with in such a way where the spirit has been following her, essentially. Gods have been, and they were integrated pretty well. So having this spiritual moment be the first time we're introduced to this ghost concept, and also have it be the saving grace and solution to the major current problem that Opal is having of going to be dead, it felt really out of place in this mass conglomeration of ideas that we've already set up and are internally consistent. I think most of that probably stems from this pretty core writing idea that you cannot introduce the solution to a problem as it's solving the problem. It makes a reader feel a bit icky when they read it, and that's essentially what happened here. It was like, oh, hey, ghosts are real. Ghosts are saving you. Ghosts have made you make this decision. And so we need those breadcrumbs earlier in the story. And those didn't really occur with this particular instance. It's even mentioned in the story, like, oh, this is the intervention of that god. He's normally not going to be allowed this close to the DFZ spirit's soul. It's kind of an exception. Just have that god show up. Don't have this random spirit show up to be that voice. I don't know. This plot point was a bit weird. That's my critical issue with this book, is that main plot point right there. And those are honestly my only two big issues with this whole story, other than the one that I mentioned in the spoiler-free portion of kind of a little bit weak on the soft world building stuff. Everything else feels really well done. I love the external pushing on her from the sidelines from her creepy dragon not dad character that is only briefly mentioned and shows up a few times, but is the main force pushing on her, and it really feels like it. It's something that you're able to kind of connect to from a real world perspective of these overbearing parents and holding this debt over her head and having him be the critical reason of all of this bad luck taking place on her, kind of kickstarting this whole plot line off. I loved Sybil, Opal's AI that we're introduced to, and then I really hated her when we find out that she's been tampered with by Opal's dad. And I think that emotional shift that I felt as I was reading those scenes, and then my kind of distrust and almost hatred for Sybil as we move forward in the story, that kind of showcases really good writing. It showcases that I was really bought into the emotional conflicts that are happening in this story. The once respected, she really does care about Opal, turns into a kind of a distrust and annoyance for this AI. It takes a lot of strong writing to make that emotional change happen and work well for the reader, as well as fit in the logic and make sense with the story. It stays consistent with the story. It's foreshadowed by Nick being distrustful of AI and new tech to begin with. And Nick himself is a really cool character. I'm glad we swerved that romance that was potentially going to happen and kind of sidetracked the rest of the more important plot points. But he's a great partner in crime for Opal. And as it stands, I really like them as friends and as partners. I think they have an interesting dynamic going on in between them, where Nick is kind of forcing her to see the worst parts of the DFZ, and Opal is trying to hold him to more morally good standards that he wants to hold himself to, but can't without that external push. It's like the paladin and the blood-crazed barbarian who wants to do good, but also really likes killing people. It creates a push and pull dynamic that really makes just random conversations they have just that more interesting and fun to read as well. Nick's distrust of AI and Opal making fun of him for not having his life be made easier by it, but also the fact that he's just body augmented out. It's fun that these characters have a lot of layers of truth to them, and it creates a lot more depth and a lot more realism in what a character is. And it makes it feel like when a character makes a decision, it's not because the plot made them make that decision. It's because that's what the character would do in that situation. And reading those interactions and peeling back those layers is what really drove me to enjoy this story as much as I did. Readers are people, characters are people. When you're able to create that strong connection and enjoy reading about them, that's going to do a lot more for me as a reader than just having a cool world and a cool concept. I need to connect with these characters, and I was really able to do that in this book. Overall, super fun, pretty short, interesting characters, a cool world that they're thrown into as well, some solid hooks and a good reason to keep reading by the end of this book to continue on with the rest of the series. Hit me up in those comments. What's your favorite urban fantasy book or series? And while you're down there, if you liked anything I had to say, why don't you hit that like button? And if you haven't yet, why don't you hit that subscribe button? Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one. And until then, stay lit.